It is January 15th. Yesterday, Ukraine experienced another massive rocket attack. Since around November of last year, the Russians have fired dozens of missiles at us every 7 or 10 days, some of which are aimed at power plants and other energy infrastructure, and some of which are aimed at residential buildings. You get it right. Russians sent missiles on the heads of peaceful Ukrainians resting at home. I have already talked about what a person who is not far from the place of the rocket crash feels. His or her ears are blocked. The earth walks under the feet. Everything around is shaking and trembling. It is a disgusting feeling. In general, being under fire, rocket, artillery, or even just machine gun is very, very scary. I can't even describe how much. Recall your worst fear. The one that fetters you, does not give you the opportunity to think, because of which you lose your mind, and for the sake of getting rid of which you are ready for anything. And this will be about a third of a nightmare experienced by a person who finds him or herself under fire. I know what I'm talking about. I have obsessive fears and phobias, but they completely fade in front of a rocket that fell 2 miles from me, and even more so from a projectile flying a couple of yards from me. And to hell with me. I have lived for quite a long time and seen a lot. My daughter will be an adult in a couple of months, and even before the war, there were more gray hairs on my head than black ones. In addition, I volunteered for the army myself, knowing quite clearly what awaits me there. After all, I worked in Syria, Iraq, the Gaza Strip, and other extremely unsafe places. But these attacks are not aimed at me and not at my army comrades, or rather not only at us. Russian murderers target children and their parents. They like to throw rockets at peaceful cities. They enjoy it, just like the Nazis in 1940s took pleasure in the massacres of Jewish and Roma people. And then the Nazis had quite a few partners around the world. It seems to us that the whole world was against Hitler and his gang in those days, except for a few puppet European governments completely dependent on Nazi Germany. But it is not. A lot of countries considered Hitler to be quite a respected and legitimate ruler. They kept their embassies in Berlin and invited the Nazis to the official meetings. The Nazis, in their turn, held receptions in these countries, bribed politicians and journalists, sponsored fascist parties, and in general were always inside. Just like now, the Russians are sitting in their embassies in a bunch of countries, talking nonsense in the United Nations and sponsoring outright racists and degenerates who call for the collapse of European Union and capitulation to Moscow. Even before the war, I was far from being the healthiest person. But this realization of monstrous injustice, the realization that supporters and even ideologists of indiscriminate killings of Ukrainians call me drive around Washington and Tokyo, Berlin and Johannesburg, Cairo and Brussels, this realization simply breaks me apart from inside. They don't go to jail. They don't even repent of supporting the Russian invasion. They rejoice in more and more deaths and publish official communiques with the lie that is the Ukrainians who are killing themselves. And these killers and liars feel great. No one will ever spit in their faces because they drive in expensive armored vehicles that protect them from any contact with reality. I try not to think about these people as not to spoil my health, but I can't. Thoughts of unpunished, well-fed bastards who earn their living by lying about Ukraine and Ukrainians constantly creep into my head, especially after the shelling subsides and the funeral of wars killed in these shellings begins.